So often in our field we talk about having lenses through which we see the world, and our principles are often those lenses. We talk about our principles as being lenses through which we see the world. Operationalizing a lens actually can be a challenge, not just as the principle, but the lens. We often hear from NGO workers that they have too many lenses that they're supposed to be applying to their work, that there's so much information that they are supposed to gather and then work with in that situation. A lens at its best helps us to really focus on that, those pieces of information, those vital pieces of information that we can then make use of in our actions. In practice, it doesn't seem to work that way. People find that the more lenses that they have, the more information they have, the more overwhelmed and confused they are, the more limited their ability to make decisions and take action. So I have started to think of our principles not as lenses, but as filters. How can we enact that principle? What is the bare minimum of information we need to enact that principle? What is the bare minimum of information we need in order to make an effective decision? If a lens gives us too much information and so we feel paralyzed, the phrase analysis paralysis that we all are familiar with, feel paralyzed and can't take a good decision, or once we've taken one, we're not sure whether it's the right one. Can we whittle down that information, shrink it so that we actually can start to make decisions more quickly, more rapidly, more effectively? Do No Harm Project, in its learning process, people said we need a framework. We need to take this knowledge, these stories that are being collected, and turn them into something that we can use. And so there is a framework that Do No Harm developed many years ago now, 1999. It's been a framework that people have been using for 10 years. And as I said, we visited people to ask them what they were doing with Do No Harm. Largely we're saying, how do you use this framework? The framework that Do No Harm developed mapped the relationships of assistance to conflict and how they interacted with each other, both how the conflict can interact on the assistance, but more importantly, for the principle of Do No Harm, how our actions interact with the conflict. It also developed an understanding of the mechanisms by which assistance actually has an impact on conflict. It looked at the what is it that we do and the how we do it. And we have some very good idea about how, when we're in a situation, we actually are having an impact, a negative impact, largely, as we are looking at it. That led to two possibilities for people, is that they could both predict when they were going to have a negative impact and then prevent that negative impact from taking place. If you understand the mechanisms, you can actually stop yourself from going down that path. The third thing that people have come up with is to be proactive and not to just prevent negative consequences, but perhaps to create positive impacts in that situation. The Do No Harm Project, as we began it, we were saying, let's start with do no harm. That's the fundamental principle. Let's not cause harm. And a Kenyan man many years ago said to me, don't tell me not to create peace in my own society. He said, I'm going to take these principles and I'm going to actually actively use them. And I'm not just going to not do harm, I'm going to try to create good. And I've heard that then again and again around the world, as people have said, doing no harm is good, it's not good enough. We need to actually do something beyond that. That pushes people up against the edges of their mandates, and possibly sometimes over the edges of their mandates. So it's not necessarily something I stand here as a representative of the project and say to people to do, but I can't tell you how to use Do No Harm. If you find it useful for pushing forward, you need to use it. And again, local NGOs, I find, are much more willing to take that stance. It is their own society. And they say, we will use these principles and these techniques for peace. And again and again, we've seen that. Let me give an example of a place where some people did take some action as well. In the civil war in Lebanon, UNICEF was involved in creating these ceasefires that Neil was talking about. The workers at UNICEF decided that this wasn't enough. It was okay, it was good enough to be able to vaccinate children, but they also saw that children weren't going to school because they were prevented from really moving around. So they created a magazine, an educational magazine, that they then distributed along with the vaccines. This is taking a little tiny piece of additional action there. They then started to use the magazine to promote messages of peace and messages of solidarity. The magazine was looking at Lebanon as a whole country, as a country that had a history of connection across the many groups. And they distributed that. And they found then that children were often then waiting at the vaccination points to get the magazine, but they'd written essays and stories and drawn pictures of their experiences, which they passed back to the UNICEF workers who were doing the vaccinations, and then those were incorporated into the next issue of the magazine. So the magazine became a way for children around Lebanon to connect with each other and to comment on the situation and to share the similarities of their experience in that warfare. So, small thing, having an impact on individual level, not changing the nature of the Civil War, not leading to a political solution, but engaging people in a broader social dialogue on the peace and working with the children on that aspect. What UNICEF found started to happen in the case of this is that some of the fighters who were involved in the distribution process, who were providing the access to the people, started coming up to them and saying, you know, we're not going to be fighters forever. Is there some way that we can actually help with this process? Is there something we can do? Because we know that we need to rebuild Lebanon someday. What can we do about that? Again, small thing, individual level, not changing the political structure of it, but these are fighters who are saying, what can we do to get out of this? I'm not always a fighter, I'm not only a fighter. And really capturing that sense of that individual who may be willing to be a fighter at this moment, but has other aspirations in his life later. The end result of that is that UNICEF worked with the political factions in Lebanon to set up a summer camp that would be open to children from all factions and would be run by soldiers from all factions. And the fighters, you know, put down their guns for a couple of weeks to be the counselors for children from all factions. And a ceasefire was held so that the children and the soldiers could all get together at the particular location. You know, a really remarkable thing in the middle of a war, such as Lebanon, with so many factions, so little chance of rapprochement at that moment, and yet the factions were willing to say, you're right, to their soldiers. There are opportunities, there should be opportunities for you beyond simply being a fighter at this moment. And people were willing to send their children off on the situation. I don't want to overemphasize how effective that was for political peace, because I don't think it really had that much impact in that sense, but it was workers at UNICEF looking for an opportunity to step beyond the little that they were doing. What can we do? And that cascading into children saying, let's connect across Lebanese history and our Lebanese experience, and then into the fighters who say, what can we do that is not simply fighting? Is there something else we can do? All of this has a little bit of an impact and certainly helps those people.